Hi, my name is Logan Villela, and this is my STS 101 final assignment video recap. So basically for this essay I had to address the question, what does your ideal second machine age 21st century economy and political system look like, and what is the relationship between your ideal society's economic and political systems? So to start, I'll just go ahead and read my thesis verbatim just to be, so I can be, incredibly specific with it, and then I'll start breaking down my more specific points. So my thesis goes, my ideal second machine age 21st century economy and political system would be a social welfare capitalist system designed to give everyone the opportunity to lead a stable, economically secure life, and that is run by ordinary people rather than billionaires and corporations. The relationship between my ideal economic and political system would be mutually beneficial, meaning that the government would implement social welfare capitalist policies to create a strong middle class and confront the changing realities of life and work created by automation, which in turn would produce a thriving liberal democracy. So to start off, my first point is that my ideal political and economic system in the 21st century second machine age would address the changing realities of work in the United States created by globalization and automation. So right now in the United States, the once abundant traditional 9 to 5 middle class job, that is becoming an increasingly rare occurrence for a lot of workers in our current economy. There is an abundance of work, but a lack of jobs. And by that, I mean there's plenty of labor that still needs to be done. That hasn't changed. But there's less full-time positions dedicated to doing that labor because companies realized that they can now hire people as gig or contract workers, so they can have them do the work when it's available and then kind of just let them go when the work is done, and that absolves them of the responsibility of providing those people a lot of times with benefits and vacation time, retirement, healthcare, so on and so forth, which, is a good arrangement for the businesses, but a not so good one for American workers who need a lot of those things to survive. And on top of that, the jobs that they're doing usually provide pretty chaotic schedules and don't pay great wages. A lot of times they're minimum wage, and people simply can't get by on that. And as a result, our government hasn't responded particularly well to these concerns, especially on the workers' end over the last few decades. So the inefficient response to that changing economy has left workers leading unstable, financially insecure lives and unable to obtain or maintain a middle-class lifestyle, which is not good, because a strong middle class is a sign of a strong economy, which I'll get into more detail about later. But in my ideal government and economy, I would make the gig and contract work that is currently so prevalent in the 21st century economy capable of supporting a middle class lifestyle, just like the manufacturing jobs of the 20th century were deliberately converted into middle class sustaining jobs. For example, one of Nick Hanauer's ideas, implementing a $15 minimum wage, I am in support of, because I think that would help to stimulate growth in the economy by giving people more money to put back into it, and by reducing the income inequality gap, which is a huge problem that I'll touch on later. In addition, though, I think we need to untether healthcare, retirement, and vacation benefits from employers and make them a government-based benefit system, because tying those things to work anymore just doesn't make sense in our current economic model. So if we do that, then they could be carried from job to job, similar to how Nick Hanauer's plan of a shared security plan, I believe he called it, that's how it was structured, and I think that's a really good idea. So my second point, proposition for my ideal and economic political system, would also be to enact policies that ensure automation is being used to supplement and aid human workers rather than ruthlessly and carelessly replace them and make their lives miserable like it kind of does now. So I'm sure you've heard of a lot of examples. Amazon, Walmart, Target, etc. Big corporations have been either entirely replacing their workforce, parts of their workforce with automation and machines, or they're using automation to make the remaining humans as efficient as possible. So basically, those remaining workers are being told what to do during their entire shifts by an algorithm that is demanding increased efficiency standards from them all the time. And in order, it's almost impossible for most people to meet those standards without, working themselves into the ground. And that is not a particularly desirable job for most people to have when they're working themselves into exhaustion every day. And on top of that, people, in these jobs are getting chaotic schedules created by algorithms. So, during the holiday rush at Christmas time, they might be getting, 20 hours of overtime every week. And then in January, when everything slows down, they might be only getting 15. And that isn't ideal for sustaining a middle-class lifestyle. And on top of that, they often aren't getting paid a living wage, and they aren't getting health care benefits or vacation, so on and so forth. So all of this, as you can imagine, has made American workers pretty fearful and angry about the emergence of automation, because it just is this lurking thing that, is there to make their lives worse. But in my ideal government and economy, automation would be used like it is in Sweden, where it supplements workers and makes their jobs easier and more efficient instead of replacing them outright and leaving them with no way to support themselves. So, for example, in the article titled "The Robots Are Coming and Sweden is Fine," the author Peter S. Goodman detailed the story of these Swedish miners who had recently had, a lot of automation implemented into their mining facility. And, they use these joysticks to control the crane in the mines and stuff. And that not only, made their jobs safer, but also easier and more efficient. And they were viewing it in a very positive light because, like I said, it was making their lives easier and not there to just replace them ruthlessly. And, the Swedish people also know that even if, automation does eventually replace them, that they're going to be taken care of by their government and the social welfare policies that it's implemented. And this reality wasn't created by accident or because Sweden is special or lucky, but because their government implemented the policies that, incentivize their businesses to implement automation in a way that works for most people. And the American government has very much not done that, and that would be something, I would like to see the Swedish model enacted here. So my ideal economic and political systems would also be designed to maintain a large and thriving middle class, to keep wealth and income inequality from getting out of control as it currently is in the United States. Right now, in the United States, the 3 wealthiest people or families in the country have more wealth between them than the bottom 50% of Americans. And that is wrong, in my opinion, and also, unsustainable for an economy. You just can't have that much inequality and expect your economy to be thriving or your people to be doing well. So, corporations have been bringing in record profits over the last 40 years or so. And at the same time, the American worker hasn't seen the minimum wage increase at the federal level in that same time span. So, things are getting better and better for corporations while everybody else, down here has just stayed flat or even, decreased significantly. And that's not a good place to be. And of course, again, this stuff doesn't happen by accident. The neoliberal policy choices made by our politicians, both Democratic and Republican, over the last 40 years or so, have allowed this reality to take shape by accelerating the onset of globalization and automation. The policy choices they've made have also produced a rural white underclass and exacerbated the struggles of the urban black underclass that was created during the 20th century first machine age. Again, that underclass was also produced by a lot of policy choices along with racism. But so the people who are a part of these underclasses, they have almost no hope of escaping their fates, because the disappearance of middle class jobs in their communities has given them no way to really improve their economic standing. So how are they supposed to, improve themselves or improve their economic standing? I mean, as a result, many people have turned to drugs and violence to cope. In the urban Black communities, it was crack cocaine and a lot of gang violence in the 80s. And now in the 2010s or 2000s, 2010s, it's in the rural white communities. It's, the heroin epidemic and, drugs and suicide that people are doing to cope. And it's very sad and not sustainable. And of course, for the rural white and underclass, we've also seen this has brought about a lot of populist rage that has been directed at the ballot box and caused them to support Donald Trump, who promised to bring back the manufacturing jobs that once made the communities, in the industrial Midwest and the Rust Belt so prosperous. So in my ideal economy, this reality where there's underclasses of people and the wealthy owning everything, that would not exist, because the government would implement policies to support the middle class rather than the wealthy elites to help spur economic growth. So, like I was alluding to earlier, the middle class truly is the driver of economic growth, because when you have more people who are able to put money into the economy, then of course it's gonna grow. And then when that money goes back into businesses, they're gonna realize that they're actually making more money when their employees are able to make more money, because then those employees can go and spend at those businesses. So it's a mutually beneficial cycle. But if we implemented social welfare policies like a UBI, $15 minimum wage, Medicare for all, free post-secondary education, so on and so forth, then more people in this country would be able to live in financial security and sustain a middle-class life. And in addition to what I was, explaining the economic benefits, there's also political benefits in that if more people are living a comfortable middle-class lifestyle, then they probably won't be going, be as angry at the world around them, and be therefore less susceptible to, a right-wing, demagogue like Donald Trump. So now the relationship between my ideal society's economic and political system would be one that encourages American citizens to think of themselves as, in the collective, as being in charge of their fate, rather than the government just being some outside force that's just kind of doing things arbitrarily, like to or for and against them. So right now, like I was saying, most people kind of think of the government as like a separate force in the United States that kind of acts independently of their will, which I wouldn't even say they're wrong in that regard. And that's largely because, our government, the reason these neoliberal policies are being implemented is because our politicians are essentially accepting legalized bribes over the last 40 years or so from corporations, and that relationship works by, a corporation funds the politician's campaign, then the politician then legislates for that corporation to keep the cash flow going. And unfortunately, it based on, neoliberal policy theory, the interests of corporations don't necessarily align with that of working people. And so when the neoliberal politicians legislate for those corporations, it's usually to the detriment of the working Americans in the middle class and working class. So in my economic and political system, it would be designed more for active participation in government by all Americans, and politicians would work for the interests of the people rather than the billionaires and the corporations. So, first and foremost in my political and economic system, campaigns would be totally grassroots funded. There would be no corporate funding allowed, because, it only makes sense, because the middle class, if it is truly the driver of growth, then why would we not want to legislate for its needs first? Andrew Yang, I believe, had a really great idea during his campaign. It was called democracy dollars. And it would be Americans would basically get $500 in like subsidies or something during a presidential year, and or it might even be every year just to spend on local elections too. But you could spend that money on a political campaign, and the best part about that is it's not really coming out of a worker's like an average person's pocket, and they're able to be directly involved in their democracy and government, and they get to be the ones who are funding the campaign, and therefore the ones the politicians are beholden to. But in addition to that, I would say the American people in my ideal government would also view the government as a tool they can use to accomplish something big together that would benefit everyone, and that it couldn't be done on their own. Countries like Canada, Germany, Sweden, etc. have implemented policies like these, and it's no coincidence that they're thriving in the 21st century. Their middle classes are growing, and they've been able to mitigate a lot of the negative effects that the second machine age has had on countries like the United States. If Americans are able to see their government like that as a political tool to use to improve their economic and social lives, then we could create our own 21st century identity that puts the middle class first, and then will in turn spur economic growth. So my next point is that the relationship between my ideal society's economic and political system would also be to ensure that capitalism is kept in check, so that through government regulation specifically. Nick Hanauer said in one of his articles that unregulated capitalism kind of tends toward the staggering inequality and erosion of the middle class that we're seeing right now. Neoliberal policies have favored the deregulation of the economy, and that has allowed capitalism to go unchecked, which has exacerbated and accelerated the consequences of globalization and automation, especially for American workers. In my ideal world, our political system would be used to keep capitalism in check and make sure that it is benefiting the American workers, who are the driving force behind the economy. Policies like UBI, Medicare for All, Green New Deal, free public college, etc. would help to ensure a just transition into a new 21st century economy that would more fairly spread the wealth in this country. If we reduce income inequality and expand the middle class, like I said, we're going to see growth, and it only makes sense that we implement policies that help reduce income inequality so that we can realize that economic growth. Putting more money into people's pockets will inject money back into the economy and help the economy to grow. So then finally, the relationship between my ideal society's economic and political systems would ultimately work to ensure that liberal democracy can thrive in the 21st century. The reason that liberal democracy is in jeopardy right now in the United States is because the politicians in Washington have largely ignored the needs of the average American for 40 years, and they're angry and lashing out. And many of them put their faith in Donald Trump in 2016 because they at least believed that he would try to do things differently and change things. Hillary Clinton was the poster child for the neoliberal status quo, and people knew that if she was elected, nothing would change for them. So they put their bets on Donald Trump. Now, unfortunately, people today, have so little faith in the neoliberal policies running our government today, they were willing to turn toward a fascist demagogue like Donald Trump, who ran on economic populism and said he would bring back the manufacturing jobs of the United States, which, of course, he has not done, and really he nor anybody else can do. So the neoliberal deregulation that has created the economic booms and busts over the last few decades that we've seen, it has a lot of parallels with the unregulated global capitalism and, booms and busts associated with that in the decades leading up to World War I and II. And if this economic boom and bust is a precursor to a world war, that's probably not a very good sign for our economy. So, if we want to prevent World War III and leaders like Donald Trump, who stoke the fires of white nationalism and racism from emerging, and perhaps preventing an even worse version of Donald Trump from coming about, we have to address the needs of our country's people and use our political system to do so in order to save liberal democracy. If we respond to the economic woes that the Donald Trump's base is feeling, it'll help, because when people are content and secure in their own lives, they're a lot less likely to gravitate toward, racial ideologies and right-wing tendencies, that Donald Trump embodies. So the best way, as we've said in class often, to keep to preserve liberal democracy is to keep people from wanting to go to Hitler rallies. And the best way to do that, in my opinion, is to give them the economic security in the 21st century second machine age. Now, I'm not trying to suggest that racism would be completely eliminated if we just simply give people, more money or put them in the middle class, but I think it's going to definitely reduce a lot of the racial tensions in this country, because, again, when people are able to be content and happy in their own lives, they're not as likely to, scapegoat or focus on another group as much. So, yeah, that concludes my video essay recap. Thank you for watching.